we have on the panel some persons you've already seen or heard today, who's Marcel Fratzscher, Horacio, Levy, Gerhard Bosch. New with us is Sarah Tigchelaar. She's pupil from Hermann Tast Gymnasium in Husum, and she and her colleagues developed a model of basic income combined with education skills with a European point system. Hopefully you just learned something about that in the coffee break, but we will discuss it more detailed now. And Jeromin Zettelmeyer is with us. He's head of department Principles of Economic Policies within the Bundesministerium für Wirtschaft und Energie. Sarah, when it comes to your model, you developed something with a whole range of education, of incentives, of making people just caring for their kids and doing things like that. Does it need all that to make people able to participate in the labor market, in society, and to become persons who do not suffer from any inequality? So if you take a microphone.
Yes, of course we need some of this, because if you don't have any reforms, then you couldn't even pay for the system. So it's always related to the taxes, which we would use the value-added tax for, and a part of financial transaction tax. But the others you could leave out, but at the end you need all of them to make it a system which makes sense, let's say it this way, because the state hasn't got really an effort of it if there's nothing else given, just the UBI.
What you are doing is to provide unconditional basic income for everybody, and you would raise the taxes for that, the VAT and other taxes, and then make people participate in your systems of education and developing skills.
Yes, this would be through the EPS. It would be a European point system. So you would have an account for these points where it would be valued if you do something like volunteering or some social work.
So you get the points if you just do something sensible.
Yes, but also sensible not only for the society, but also for you if you are educating yourself and having a degree and something. Then it would be good for your points.
And how can you spend the points?
You cannot spend them like money, but they will give you some. You will get like school books, for example, cheaper for it, or maybe stuff you need for your children, or just things that make sense, not for luxury, but
So you can't buy cigarettes, but you can buy books for that. Thank you very much. Jeromin Zettelmeyer, would it make sense to develop new systems in order to focus on the lower 40% of society who Marcel Fratzscher urged us to focus on the lower 40% of society this morning in order to fight inequality and to find the right persons to fight inequality?
Yes, absolutely it would. So as I think was pointed out and possibly in several of the presentations today, the fact that our Gini in terms of disposable income has been relatively stable hides a deterioration within that of the income share of the lower 40%, and so I think this requires some action. I think also if one takes the right kinds of actions, it might also address the market inequality problem which might be driving it. And so basically I think you we should be looking at policy measures mainly in two areas. One has to do with equality of opportunity, so particularly early childhood education, mentoring, integration of minorities, and possibly, even though it's very difficult and it's been around for a long time, like Jens Spahn said, to desegregate our secondary school system a bit, or at least make segregation more reversible. And then the other set of measures, which was also pointed out today by Mr. Grabka and others, is the fact that our redistributional system is quite inefficient. So it is not really primarily geared, only partly geared to the bottom 40%. So I think that the trick would be to look at changes in taxes and benefits which will lower the net burden on the bottom 40% and at the same time create bigger incentives to work, and particularly to work full time. And I think here we're actually quite weak. Quite a lot can be done.
And if you put it politically, who is interested in efficiency in transfer systems?
Well, in principle, we should have a grand coalition between those that are fiscally conservative, that are worried about the state becoming too big, and not having sufficient fiscal space for new challenges such as refugees. So our friends in the Ministry of Finance should be with us, and those that are really generally concerned about distribution, and so the Social Democrats should also be on board. So we should have a wonderful grand coalition for these sorts of things.
Marcel Fratzscher, is it only about political orientation, or is it also about the interest of middle classes to prevent a system from changing too fastly?
I think there's a strong political component, because if you see the discussion here, if you see the discussion pretty much everywhere, I think there is a broad agreement. We really have a problem in terms of equality of opportunity. We have an issue of efficiency of redistribution. I think there is of course, a big concern, and there's a lot of discussion of the disappearing of the middle class. And if you now look into the future, I know there are different views. Some people say this is an issue, others say it's not at all an issue. But if you look into the future, 30, 40 years, and if you look at the nature of work in the future, we know that it's in particular the jobs in the middle class that will disappear much more rapidly. We will have an increase rather at the lower end services that you cannot really substitute in. And we will, of course, continue to have skill-based technological change, so people at the top benefiting. So there is there will continue to be major pressure on the middle class, and that's exactly why the issue of adequate training, adequate opportunities is so important. But of course, there are worries about having change that's too quick and has an impact on the middle class.
Gerhard Bosch, you recommended us to think about strengthening trade unions to come back to something we've had in Western Germany in the 80s and early 90s years. Would that improve the ability to cope with change, with disruptive tendencies in economics?
Yes, I don't think that technological change will necessarily hollow out the middle class. I know these scenarios, but I think the major reason why the middle class at least in the primary distribution of market incomes is shrinking is not technology, but is weakening of labor market institutions. This is deregulation, creating exit options out of certain labor standards by precarious forms of work, and declining coverage by collective agreements. There's clear evidence that the wage inequality is increasing with declining coverage by collective agreements. And I'm really astonished that in the OECD papers, which really understands the negative impact of inequality in their diagnosis of the reasons and their recommendations, revitalization of labor market institutions do not play a real role, and they need to play a real role. Otherwise, we will not get the middle class back. And finally, your question was, is collective bargaining dealing with structural change? I think it is. If you see Sweden, also the collective agreements in Germany right now, they are really negotiating flexibility within companies. I could give many examples of working time flexibility, functional flexibility, etc. In effect, they are negotiating at the industry level, which makes diffusion of new work practices into all companies much easier than if you negotiate company by company.
Horacio, you were addressed as somebody who didn't recognize the importance of collective bargaining.
Well, I'm going to try to skip from answering the question because, or partially at least, I'm not a liberal economist. I work in the social policy division, and my colleagues from labor will be much more qualified.
No excuse, you are here.
I know, but I have to give this caveat before because I'm sure that my colleagues will be able to answer much better than me. Not in this publication, but in the previous publication in Divided We Stand, where we look at what are the drivers of income inequality. Of course, we look at union density and collective bargaining as one of the potential elements that could explain the rise in income inequality. And we did see some effect of this, but it was not as important as the other three elements that we saw as the key ones, which were changes in labor, and that may be related to that to union participation. So the changes in the labor conditions, the technological change, and the changes in taxes and benefits. So in the OECD we do not ignore the relevance of trade unions, and we have a trade union committee in the OECD, and they're extremely outspoken about it. I was in a meeting with them a couple of weeks ago, and they were doing exactly the same point as you're doing here, and it's a fair point. And there has been new analysis. For example, the IMF published a paper in summer looking at income inequality at the municipal level, the zip code level in the United States. And according to this work, it seems that union density was one of the big explanatory variables of income inequality, of differences in income inequality and zip code. So we haven't done analysis on this since Divided We Stand, but it's always in our agenda. In terms of policy, it's still early days for us to have a clear view about it, but it's not out of our radar.
Thank you. Marcel Fratzscher, this morning you mentioned, and even Jens Spahn did it, mentioned the importance of the refugee crisis, or the fact that we have to deal with refugees in Germany should bring something like a push in inequality policies as a whole. What do you think? What will be the outcome or sensible outcome to deal with refugees, to make them integrate fastly, to make them join the workforce fastly? What should politics do?
First of all, not make it an issue about distribution. So at the moment, part of politics is actually using it and saying, look, to gather support against refugees and against integrating them by saying, look, that means we have to look after the refugees, implying that there will be less money for investment, for social services, for social expenditure. I think it's a real big challenge also in terms of inequality in the long run. We know a lot of people who are coming are young, but we also know a very high share has low skills, either not even completed high school or any schooling or enough schooling. So if you don't integrate them, the issue of unemployment will become a huge one. Distributional issues become much more important. So we basically have to find a way to counter that, or at least try to counter it. you said everyone sees the solution in education this morning. So my answer will not surprise you, but that's the only way. I mean, the big chance is they're young who are coming. Most of them are below the age of 25, which means they can still get schooling, they should get an education or training that they basically are qualified to do some job. By the way, the same applies to long-term unemployment, right? We often ignore in Germany, we have still 2.7 million unemployed. But that's essentially the same challenge of integration, right? We have people who have been out of jobs for 2, 3 or more years. If you look at who are these people, they are usually people who don't have a completed school education or job qualification. So the same challenge applies to them. So we really need to do a lot more on qualification, getting people any qualification to get into the labor market. And maybe just a final word, we have a bit of this arrogance to believe that only skilled workers with high skill and high income are actually a gain for German society and the German economy. And that's completely wrong. I mean, you need really a good mix of people, right? I mean, it's not just that you need highly skilled people. And if you look at many calculations, there's the idea, you know, if people with low income, they cost more money than they actually contribute. That's a very narrow perspective on taxes and transfers. And we need a broader perspective on the economic contribution they do on the supply side and the demand side.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether Joachim Müller is with us. I think he left, unfortunately. He left, okay, because he could help us with the question of integration of refugees. But Jeromin, you are with us, and this morning we had a discussion with the word disruptive, and refugees could be disruptive for the German labor market policy and even the policy on inequality. Would you think that Germans who go to elections are welcoming disruptive tendencies in their life? We even heard with Jens Spahn that everything goes quite well, that everybody is well off, that we do have the best times we ever had. So why is a need for disruptive tendencies? Why should people think we need it?
I mean, I guess the basic point that Jens Spahn made, and I completely agree with him, that is that societies that are relatively successful, they tend to get stuck with, you know, systems that are clearly suboptimal and maybe expensive and maybe wasteful, but they're stable, they give you steady growth, and they tend not to be very innovative. Right, and in some sense they become victims of their own success. So I think this is one of the reasons why Germans are not a particularly reform, friendly or reform-keen society. Germans like to demand reforms from the rest of Europe, but they're not very keen about reforming themselves. This is, I think, sort of has been a constant since the Second World War. We really only went through disruptive changes twice in our history. One was immediately after the war when we needed to really rebuild things, and the other one was the Hartz reforms. And things have to get pretty bad. They have to get threatening in some sense before we move. And I think this presumably is the logic of disruptive reform with the refugees. I mean, here effectively we have a choice of doing very little and risking what you might call a French problem of lack of integration in 10 years with disastrous consequences, or we can take it much more seriously. We can get really German and focused about this and say what is the kind of integration that we need to avoid this sort of thing. And I do think this will concentrate our minds. Now, the critical question is whether this can be disruptive without being divisive, right? And here, I guess that the trick is to engage in a set of reforms that are not specifically targeted to refugees, but they break down barriers that potentially will help everyone in the lower 40%, regardless of where the initial inequality of opportunity comes from, whether it comes from the fact that, your parents just arrived, that you're from a different culture, that you don't speak German, or that you come from a different socioeconomic background. And I think, ultimately both things have the same answer, which is to deal with these potentially disenfranchised groups, you need to teach not just skills, right? That's the boring bit, but you need to teach effectively learning techniques, right? You need to teach basic social competences that enable people to do well in what is otherwise a reasonable public education system. Of course, it becomes very specific, right? There are some social competencies, like being focused and working hard, that you may not have to teach the refugees very much. Others, which is how to go about their way in a different culture. But I think there can be some remedies that apply to both. So I think there are very successful experiments with, for example, mentoring of socially disenfranchised young people. So I'm not even talking about early childhood. I'm talking about 8 to 12-year-olds in the Cologne-Bonn area, where they basically pair up university students just to go out and talk and go and have ice cream once a week. And it has been shown in a randomized experiment to have a very big impact about the schooling success of these kids. These are the sorts of approaches which I think would work with the refugees as well.
Sarah, what could be the impact of your model to help with the refugee crisis, or to reintegrate people who are not integrated in a labor market and social life?
So we decided not to focus on this with our system, but I have a question to what you just said, because you told us that we Germans need to get frightened before we really are able to act. I think this might be right, but if so, then why didn't we act a bit earlier? Because wasn't it frightened enough that we knew about all these wars going on, and we knew about that there will be people coming and not just some?
Well, what is the role of external shocks, and how should we anticipate them, and why don't we do that? Probably you would like to comment on that again.
Is there anyone who wants to answer that question?
No, I don't think so.
Yes. I think, we have been faced with significant disruption in the Middle East for a long period of time, and this has never happened in this form. I mean, with hindsight, it seems quite obvious. But I mean, I agree, there was a lack of foresight, and there was a lack of imagination. And I think it fits the same pattern, which is that you only take problems seriously once they have started to become palpable inside your own country to a significant degree. And I think this is what has happened now.
Horacio. What is your experience? Is it only a German problem to do not anticipate problems, social problems which are just on the horizon, or is it common around the OECD countries?
I think it's human nature, isn't it? I mean, we tend to put our heads on the sand and hope for the best, and wait and hope that things get.
And sometimes they do.
I'm not sure that this is only a German trait. I never heard that before, so I'm sorry, I cannot really comment on this. On the refugee crisis, of course, this is a particular type of event, but our studies related to migration, and because which is of course has a different nature, but in some countries has also been seen as a threat to the welfare state, to the feasibility of maintaining social protection. What the analysis of the OECD has shown, that in countries that have been net recipients of migrants have in fact benefited from migration. So I can understand that there is of course a scare when the mass of movement is very large in a short period of time, but the evidence has been that at least in kind of the experience in the EU with the movement of population across the EU, it has been positive for countries that have received foreigners. So of course it is a crisis and a challenge, but it can also be a big opportunity.
Gerhard, please.
I have to say I'm a little bit tired of this discussion that on the German Angst and that we are afraid of reforms. Aren't we? No, I don't think so. First of all, what is mostly not discussed is that in the world of work, so many changes have taken place, and many of them were negotiated. They were intentionally done, like introduction of new types of work organization, working time flexibility, the reform of vocational training, and from my point of view, not the Hartz reforms, which was a noisy political reform with a lot of marketing, but the silent revolution within companies is the base of our economic success in the last years. And this is completely ignored in economics because you don't have quantitative indicators and mostly are only looking on external flexibility and not internal flexibility. And also, on the other hand, we have an enormous change, for example, like now in our family model, building up kindergartens, etc. in a short time, which is amazing. I had never believed that we would do this. Fortunately, we have an East German Chancellor who doesn't just understand the male ministers from the Bavarian government who think that kindergartens and whole-day schools are something very negative. She just don't understand these type of conservatism, which is a good thing. So we are doing some things, but we are also ignoring certain future problems. Like we are going a very risky way by underinvesting in our public infrastructure and in many areas we are not doing very well. But I would agree with Horace. In other countries it's the same. We have special interest groups, and negotiating any political progress is a very difficult process, and you have to really lobby for it. And the reason why I mention all the time collective bargaining as a major reason, and is for inequality, is that this is we have to convince people that labor market institutions are important, and you will only change or improve reduce inequality if you change labor market institutions. With training alone, you will not reach this, but you have to reach a certain understanding of the importance of these labor market institutions, which is not given today.
Jeromin.
Okay. So I have to clarify what I said. So first of all, I agree with virtually everything you said, including what you said about childcare and our chancellor. So my point was the following. So I think it is fair to say that we are, in international comparison, a country with a reasonably long-standing tradition, which starts at least after the Second World War, and in many cases goes back much further, I would say, to the early 19th century, which with well-functioning economics and more recently political institutions, right? And by that I mean participatory democracy, I mean an independent legal system, I mean a culture of participation in labor market decisions, social partners, a fairly competent civil service. These are all traditions. Because of these traditions, we do reasonably well, no matter how bad our policies are, right? This is sort of a bit of a contradiction, but what I mean to say is that we are a country that has, because these deep institutions are really what matters in the long run, we have avoided crisis outcomes, right? We have much less volatility in that sense than other countries. And because we have avoided these crises, we tend to reform less, simply because we get less into situations where, the power of interest groups, which you correctly mentioned, simply has to be ignored because of the existential nature of the crisis, right? And so I think that the refugee issue is such an existential moment, and notwithstanding the fact that we have good institutions, we also have some pretty lousy features of our tax systems, of our policies, and Mr. Grabke pointed out the inefficiency of our redistributional system. So, and other things is we have a large, very powerful middle class that has a very strong interest in perpetuating some of the institutions that essentially guarantee inequality of opportunity in Germany, right? And so in order to break these things down, I think that occasionally one needs disruptive shocks. In Germany, these disruptive situations do not come endogenously as much as in other countries because of this culture of stability. Now we have it exogenously, and so let's make the best of it.
Before asking the audience to take part in our discussion, I would like to ask everybody of you if there is a window of opportunity to do reforms in order to address the lower 40% of society, and if this window of opportunity exists because of the refugee crisis. Marcel, what should we do first? If there would be one thing you could address and you could realize in economic policy, in labor market policy, what would be the thing to start with in order to lower inequality and to address the refugee crisis rightly?
To me, it's borderline. It's more probably a political economy answer. But if you look at when governments are actually willing and able to do major reforms, it's usually when they're with the back to the wall, when they're in really difficult situation, and when there's an awareness in society more generally that we need to change. And 2003 or early 2000s was that moment. In Spain, we had it over the last few years. Spain did actually a lot tougher reforms than we did in Germany 10, 15 years ago. So I think we need to create that moment where there is really a clear awareness.
Well, the moment is here, so what would you do?
Well, what I would do now, concretely, I think we need a major investment initiative. This will not surprise you to hear from DLW.
So that is what you advise the minister.
But I think we need it in many areas. We need it not just in public infrastructure, but education. We need it in all measures of integration. So that it's particularly labor market. So I think companies, it's not that the government will say, here's the money and we will do this, but it's really a much broader challenge. So I think we need to get companies on board. It's I find it sometimes a bit ridiculous when companies with more than 100,000 employees tell you, yes, we take this refugee issue seriously. We have now 20 trainees who are refugees in our company. So I think we need a lot bigger commitment also from companies to say, yes, we will create training positions for refugees where they really have a degree at the end, where they can actually get into the labor market. So access to labor market is a number one issue.
Thank you. Horacio, what would you recommend?
I agree entirely with Marcel, but to add something, I think and has been already mentioned before, it's childcare. I think female participation is a big issue, but it's also, we were talking about the bottom 40%, and we know that experiences of vulnerability, of poverty in early ages of your life have knock-on effects on adulthood. So if you are able to give more chances for children in vulnerable situations to have access to good education, to have access to childcare, to allow their mothers to get involved in the labor market, you have a win-win situation in which you are increasing, you're reducing income inequality at the present, but you're increasing what's very important, mobility for the future. And I think that also has to be a little bit, although I am really not a specialist about, and I know really little about the refugee crisis, but I know that the demographics of this population is quite young, and many of them come with young children. So, investing in these kind of policies I'm sure that can have a very positive effect on integration of this group coming to Germany.
So your model would help us to come to these aims, just giving everybody a basic income, making it possible to get something like an add-on if you are doing something, if you're just learning or just working, if you do something for the society or just take part in young parents courses and things like that. So what would you suggest to do first?
So our system would start with education too. I know you don't like to hear it, but I think it's really important to start there so that we have like an equal base. It also would, just starts with the lower 40%. So if we have this equal base of education, we can build on this, and then we would have better educated citizens, and also individually jobs, because if you have all this information you need, like if you have what we would suggest is something like child preparation courses. It's before the child is born, as it says, and so that from the beginning the parents get better information, not just that maybe smoking is bad for your child, but also about things that really matters besides of that, like what influences a child, like music or what you eat and all this. So we start really early, and we would rise up to school, and there we would do also other reforms, like the normal system for 9 years, courses afterwards. For 1 or 3 years you can choose it by yourself, what you need to orientate yourself, and afterwards you could choose your job better, because in our generation we have many chances for our jobs later on, but I think we don't really get an orientation over it, and maybe we end up in something we are not satisfied with, and this is also not good for economy if we are not
Thank you.
with it.
Gerhard Bosch, what would you do first?
The labor market reforms I proposed earlier in my presentation, and I think now the refugees need to be trained, and the refugees are babies, they are children, they are teenagers, they are adults. So it's not sufficient just to extend childcare. Also, this is a very important point of institution for integration. We also need to give adults a second chance, and this second chance of retraining nearly doesn't exist in the German system. We had a good system of retraining in our labor market policy, which was substantially reduced, slightly extending now, but not at a very large scale. Instead, we supported €1 jobs, which helped young people without skills not very much. So we have to rethink also in our national policy, and also for those who are already here and not refugees, to give them second chances. I imagine that suddenly we start retraining 100,000 or 200 refugees and refusing those who are already here this chance. This will support the AfD party substantially if we do this. So we cannot just introduce so-called privileged measures for refugees, but we have to create equal chances also for the low-skilled and those in need of retraining.
I think that was the purpose this morning, that was addressed this morning, that we should open it up for everybody in Germany. Jeromin, what will you do?
I mean, first of all, I should say we actually have done quite a lot, right? There were 2 legislative packages in August and September, which much reduced the barriers that existed. Now, you allow people now to enter the labor market after 3 months if they belong to the group that
who have a perspective to stay.
Have a perspective to stay. Thank you very much. And this was reduced from about a year. Then we give some legal comfort to employers who want to train people by essentially guaranteeing that they cannot be deported while the process is going on, and if they are then offered a job, then even if they were denied asylum, they can get a work visa. So I think in particular in international comparison, we have, I think, a fairly liberal and integration-friendly system, in the sense that work and skill opportunities are essentially open to refugees during this process. What I think we need to address more is the skill issue at a very basic level. So it's about language, but it's also about how you orient yourself in a completely different type of society. And this is the big one. And here I do tend to think that because we have a tradition where some of these skills are taught inside companies in connection with technical skills, that fundamentally is the right approach. The really difficult thing is how we're going to scale this, right? And so here we have not completely thought this through. We have to do more on this.
And what do you think should be the benefits for people who are already living here, or people who are Germans and are part of the lower 40% and do not see that they have the same perspectives, the same chances on the labor market?
Right. So I think here you have to distinguish two phenomena. I think it was Mr. Bosch pointed out that some of the inequality has come from the fact that there is an increasingly unequal distribution of the quantity of work. Right. So one important fact is to encourage more full-time work, and I think this does very much have to do with effectively taxes and social contributions and privileging mini jobs and so forth. So here we doubtlessly need some reform. So there needs to be some package of tax and social contribution reform which lowers both marginal tax rates to make it essentially more worthwhile to work longer, and the total tax burden for those groups. I think that's important. But then there's another issue which addresses the fact that the reason this is more about the long-term unemployed rather than about mini jobs. That people in the lower 40% to some extent are those that have had a harder time acquiring skills, and this I do think has to do with basic social competences. And those you very often do have to teach at a young age. So I think we probably need to take more of a sort of a preventive approach of not allowing the dispositions to develop that then are very difficult to reverse and lead to long-term unemployment. So it goes back to the fundamental equality of opportunity point, which, by the way, I agree with you, has to do also with reversibility if you end up in the wrong track. And then the other one is essentially taxes, benefits, social contributions, and the incentives of those.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, contributions, or remarks, you are invited to participate in our discussion. Yes, please. And Herr Spies? It is working.
Hello?
Yes.
Dietmar Horn from the Scientific Institute of the AOK. This is a health insurance company. I've learned a lot today, like the increase of income inequality, wealth inequality, which we know for sure. But I think there are still a lot of questions, at least I have a lot of questions. And let me address two questions. One question I have is, I think where in the presentations I heard, there is a conflict of aims you have. Like one, you try to improve efficiency of tax to reduce income inequality. On the other hand, it might conflict with the aim that you have, that we are a middle class society. And like countries like Australia or so on, we just transfer money or transfer to the lower bottom, maybe to a lower 20% of society, which is quite efficient, but it's not addressed to a middle class. And under consideration that our social welfare system, like the social security system, depends a lot on middle class contributions. That's the one question. If you also are aware of this conflict of aims. And the other question is, if you have a change in the population overall, like we discussed, we have refugees and we have a lot of immigration in Germany in the last years. So if the population of the whole changes, what is the effect of this on the research on income inequality? Maybe a methodological question. Is it considered in a way?
Thank you very much. Herr Spieß?
Okay, two questions. First, yes, I'm really in favor of the unconditional basic income. That's true, and was very impressed about the positions of the young guests here. But I don't hear really statements from the older ones.
We will comment on that.
Therefore, perhaps I want to force you to say a little bit to this idea of the unconditional basic income. The second question is refugees, and I don't speak about refugee crisis. I speak about refugee challenge. Think you say? Cause
well, that is politically correct.
Okay, politically correct. And of course, it's not. We cannot focus only on these refugees. We have to focus on all problems which we have for years, and refugees are the challenge to work on this. What we have done for years, and this is that politics acts more proactive is my wish. I tried, but in fact, I see it for years. It don't work, and therefore, the question is that it is a known fact from migrants that migrants work more in positions with lower skills. Therefore, they also are in concurrence on each. What we say that also migrants are still here, are the new migrants who are coming in also as concurrents.
Thank you.
Have you an answer for this problem?
Thank you very much. I don't see any other question. One more, please, on the third line. And then that is our last call for you.
I have a very short question. We mentioned that some of the labor market issues have to do with the incentives that come from tax code and from social insurance, and that it would be in favor to reduce those, especially for low-income earners. I would be interested in how you see the perspective of a green budget reform where you reduce the taxes or insurance on labor income by increasing taxes on natural resources.
Thank you very much. I would like to start with you, Marcel Fratzscher, and to add the question of taxing the rich to your question of taxing the middle classes and just fair taxing in a middle class society. So where do we get the money from? Where should we get the money from? And who should be taxed in the future? Who should be taxed more?
As I said this morning, I think we shouldn't tax more. I think we are a country and a society that already redistributes a lot, that already has a very high share of government in the economy. I think we should not increase taxes. I think we should just really make ends meet with the existing means and do it more efficiently. And it's not that the taxes necessarily, as the first speaker said, really go where they're supposed to go, but it's oftentimes they are taken out of your left pocket and put in your right pocket with a big loss of efficiency in between, because the government has a huge machinery that does a whole redistribution. So I don't think we really should raise taxes. I think it's really about asking the right questions. You have lots of examples where we do the redistribution very inefficiently. We had the Betreuungsgeld, which is very counterproductive. We have Ehegatten splitting. I even wouldn't know the English translation for that. But sorry, income splitting of taxes. Now on the last point, I would fully agree that this is a big challenge to lower the burden, the social security burden on labor, to basically reduce taxes on labor and rather have a more equal balance between capital and labor. So that's where I see not an increase in taxes per se, but really a shift that makes it more attractive for companies to hire labor, to hire workers, make them basically more productive, and have a higher tax on capital or on income. The good example is that the tax on the capital gains tax in Germany is 25%, is actually below the income tax, at least for the high income group. So that's one example where things go wrong. So I think we need a rebalancing also in taxation, but I don't think we need higher taxes.
Horacio, Levi, could you comment on the question, how do migrants contribute to inequality when they are just coming in, earning not too much in the beginning? Does that spread inequality in countries with high migration?
Okay, I'm going to be a bit controversial here. I can understand that income, that when you have a refugee challenge or crisis as the one that we're seeing now, people are very sensitive about it. But and I know that the German case is particularly important because the flow here has been high. But it's still, don't overestimate the importance of them for an indicator as income inequality. It's unlikely that the Gini coefficient of Germany is gonna become like of Chile because of the refugee crisis. So it is a challenge in terms of the provision of services, or and the integration of this population, because they're vulnerable population that come in with a lot of issues, and there is as somebody mentioned, that they may be competing in a particular fragment of the labor market. But in terms of the overall picture of income inequality, you will not see these type of movement as the ones that are going to be the ones really driving big changes in the distribution of income. But I want to take point. I would like to say something about the basic income proposal. It's very interesting because it has some kind of similarity with the type of. I found it very innovative. I don't know if I agree or not because I haven't had time to think about it. But my first reaction is that it reminds me of the type of benefits that have been implemented in developing countries in the last 20 years. They're called conditional cash transfers, and they have been quite successful in reducing inequality in these countries. So the two most cited examples are Mexico with the program is called Progresa. I think now it's called Oportunidades, but that was the original name. And it's basically a conditional cash transfer. It's means tested, so it's different from here because here we're talking about a basic income for anyone, but there is means tested. And the other one is in Brazil called Bolsa Familia, and in both cases what they did is it's not only about fulfilling the means testing or the income test, but also that you have to take your kids to school, or in the case of kids below school age, you have to take them to do health checks. And the impact of this reform, of these policies has been very, very significant for of course
and does that work in developed countries too? Would it work?
The experience in developed countries has been very minor. I think in the United States they did something in New York for students, but it's a different issue. I think it's really kind of the first time that I see a kind of a clear objective proposal of a conditional cash transfer for for a developed country, and I'm looking forward to read your paper.
Thank you. Gerhard Bosch, do you have sympathies for basic income models like this?
No. It's a waste of money. It's increasing inequality. And it's politically, at the end, you will not get the basic income. You will get the other points, the deregulation of the labor market, politically. So I checked it once. I prepared a long radio debate of 1 hour with Götz Werner, who is proposing the same system. To finance his proposal of €800 for everybody would increase VAT to 144%, which is quite substantial and not viable in our economy. And also, I don't see any reason why we should reduce progressive income tax, which is the main source of redistribution. And I don't see any reason why Mr. Zettelmeyer and me should get €800 per month in addition to our income. We don't need this money. It's just a waste. And it's an illusion of a system where suddenly you get rid of all the pressures of the capitalist system. It has to go through a political parliament, and at the end you will get out something very different from it. And I would like to add 1 or 2 points. Reducing the tax question. You mentioned inheritance tax. I was wondering why you didn't ask about this again. I think we need tax increases for the very rich. The very rich were rewarded twice. They were rewarded on the market, and secondly, they were rewarded in the transfer system, because through political pressure they succeeded to bring down their taxation of capital income as well as of their personal income, which is, from my point, just scandalous that this happened. And it's not improving the economic efficiency. I just give you an example with a new inheritance proposal, which is just in Parliament. If somebody owns 3 apartments, then and is inheriting these 3 apartments to his kids, and they have a value of $1 million or more, they have to pay inheritance tax. If you own 500 flats, then you form a company owning these flats, and then you don't pay inheritance tax. So these possibilities to avoid inheritance tax will increase inequality in our society substantially. It's just a badly made law. And my final remarks, there was a question, should we reduce social contributions? The French did this, or do this to a large scale. They spent 25 billion on this. It's a very costly, this idea, very costly. And you have to make a decision for which purpose you really use the money. And I think we definitely have more need to invest in our infrastructure and in training and education instead of doing something with a very unclear outcome. And most of these reductions, probably the companies will produce from them, because there are lower wage increases suddenly. If the net income is at the end in these processes higher of the people is very doubtful. So I would really warn about this. And the calculations there has done a lot on this of the DIW in the past. It's very, very costly.
Thank you. Jeromin, Zettelmeyer, do you agree?
We're looking at this in some detail, and basically there are different ways of doing it. And there's some ways that would be revenue neutral, there are other ways that would not be revenue neutral immediately, but would, if you factor in the labor supply incentives, become revenue neutral over time. So I think the devil is in the details. I see the point that this can be mishandled, but I think in general it is true that we have both a share, an overall tax burden net of benefits that is too high, in the low 40%, and marginal tax rates, particularly when you move from many jobs into which you agree. No, you agree with that point, which are too high, and then the question is, how do you finance it? Well, but because by reducing some of the benefits that are currently awarded. And then the big question, the political economy question, which this gentleman asked, is whether this will set up a distributional conflict with the middle class and how you deal with this. And so again, the devil is in the details. Some of these shifts can happen in a way that does not create a need for extra funding, so you need to take away money from someone else. In other cases you would, and then indeed you may have to package it with another reform that helps that group, or you may have to appeal to their sense of citizenships and the fact that, just like Mr. Bosch now said, he and I should not be getting particular benefits because we are too rich. So you can, as Mrs. Niehaus pointed out today, people's views about redistribution are only to some extent driven by what ends up in their pocket, but they're also driven about what they think is good for society. So I think if we have a vision, we can perhaps appeal to that streak. Now the final question was about green budget reforms versus labor taxes. I think the OECD has proposed this in their Deutschland exam, in their economic survey for Germany. I think it's a good idea. It does, however, get you into some really tricky political economy issues in Germany, because it effectively gets you into you couple two very sensitive areas. One is the issue of tax and benefit system, incentives for labor and so forth, which itself is very difficult, and then Energiewende and how we steer that ship. And so, one thing that I've learned in my 1.5 years at the ministry is that this is a really tough topic, which people feel very strongly about. And so I think, a very plain proposal, which is, let's just introduce a carbon tax and then lower this, probably has to be seen in the context of everything else that's going on in that sector, and that's going on at the European level with the ETS and so forth. So, the general direction is, I think, the right one. Making this happen, given where we are, is going to be very hard.
Thank you very much, Sarah. You should have the last word in this discussion. Is there something you and your generation would like to demand from the generation Fratzscher and the generation Zettelmeyer to research, in order to lower inequality in probably your generation in a long-term perspective?
So first, I want to say that this was a idealistic view that we just wanted to introduce today. It was an idea, and I think some of the things I would be really happy if they would get through. Maybe you will remember them. I think some of you already know that we focused on education, and some of you do too, as I heard today. And I think this is a really good way. Yes, and what I really hope is that we could get more equal chances for everybody, because it would be a real waste of human potential if we didn't. And also, it's personal. I would think it would be a great aim.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for your interest and for your comments, your contributions. Thank you all on the panel for your contributions, for your ideas and your ability to just think and discuss new ways of labor market economy and addressing inequality. Before leaving